I'm going to talk about how our ability to change the crisis we're facing now into a business opportunity will actually determine pretty much the fate of society as we know it, but also will, I believe, sort winners from losers in business. And I actually believe it's the biggest business opportunity of the century. I want to talk about some cases that actually see that in that way and that also transform the crisis into an opportunity. And I believe looking through a data lens is actually very helpful in these cases to focus, to find the leverage points, and to help scale up the solutions that work. And I want to end with a couple of examples that we have developed, not nearly as big data-ish as what we've been talking about up until now, but it's our small contribution, and I hope you're excited about it. Has anyone seen this movie in the audience? If you haven't, you should. And if you haven't seen the movie, you should read the book. It's fantastic. It's based on a real story about the subprime crisis in 2007, 2008. And weirdly enough, it has a lot to do with the crisis we're facing. Obviously, you've heard of Paris, the accord we had 2 years ago, and which basically says that if we want to have a shot at avoiding catastrophic climate change, dangerous, self-reinforcing climate change, that we should stay under 2 degrees. And actually, science says under 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. But when you look at the situation and you look at the amount of carbon that is still embedded in fossil fuels, of the existing oil and gas wells and coal mines, you see that we have a big problem. Because if we're serious about those Paris targets, let's say 2 degrees, it means that from the known sources of mines and fields, if we were to burn them all, we would go beyond the 2-degree target. Actually, this white area is what we can burn if we want to stay under the 2 degrees. The white area here is actually what we can burn if we want to stay under the 1 degree. This is called the carbon bubble. And you see here the difference between what the real value of an oil and gas major is, as opposed to what they pretend that they can still extract and sell and commercialize. So that's a big, big difference. If you look at the known fossil fuel reserves, so the ones that are not being drilled or mined yet, but that are owned by Shell and Total and the oil and fossil fuel majors, this difference is even worse. And that was exactly the basis of what happened in the subprime crisis. It's not me saying that. It's actually very mainstream people like the central banker of the UK, Mark Carney, who's a very outspoken advocate about climate change. He said a couple of years ago, a carbon budget consistent with the 2-degree target would render the vast majority of reserves stranded. Oil, gas, and coal that will be literally unburnable. And that was obviously what happened. This big gap between valuation and the real value is what happened in the subprime crisis. CT goes even further, and they estimate that the total amount of stranded assets, so unusable assets, fossil fuel reserves, drilling platforms, pipeline refineries, would add up to 100 trillion in potential losses. That's 5 times the amount of the 2007-2008 crisis. And the effects we're seeing, obviously, there's a big hinder of moving off of this fossil fuel, so we continue to go on and on, even though we have all the accords, etc. And we're seeing it happening. I could spend the rest of the days, discussing what are the consequences. You all know them, but this is a very real one. The image you saw just earlier is actually melting ice in Greenland that leads to sea level rise, like you see here. And communities around the world today are already adapting and starting to protect themselves here by making makeshift seawalls, with drums and whatever you can find. It's happening around the world today. It's not only in our future for our kids and our grandkids. But the real risk, obviously, is that most of our major cities lie on coastal areas. And for just Manhattan only, this obviously represents a big risk. If you believe Jim Hansen, he's a bit the guru of climate science. He says, we have been here before. When you go back in time 120 years ago, this is actually in the Rolling Stone of January 2017. It's a great article. You can freely look it up on the internet. We've been here before. If you go back in time, we see that at the current level we're at, the current quantity of CO2, the current level of warming, sea level was 20 to 30 feet higher than what it is now, 7 to 10 meters than what it is now. So it's not guessing, it's just looking back at what we know that determines where we would go if we were to stabilize where we're now. So that's the bad news. The good news is there's fantastic opportunities to change, and you've all heard about the strategies. It's fairly straightforward. Let's move off of fossil fuels in a couple of decades. Let's move from linear to a circular economy and make sure that we can resist against the climate change that's happening by reinvesting in our ecosystem services. And I want to show two great examples. One is in the Netherlands. How they do it? They actually make existing houses zero energy in 10 days without you as an owner having to pay 1 cent for this upgrade. So zero energy, 10 days. How do they do it? It's very simple. After 10 days, you have a bill that's literally €0 per month, but you continue to pay the amount, typically 175 euros per month, and this goes to paying for the upgrade of your house. They call it an upgrade, and the marketing is very clever. They don't speak about polar bears or ice melting, etc. It's all about you. What's in it for you? You will have a nicer house, you will have more comfort, your house will increase in valuation. Oh, and by the way, it's your energy bill that pays for all of this. No hassle. No lending in the bank, no postponing vacations or holidays to do it. It's for you. And they have a very simple online form for you to check whether or not you can apply this to you. And the success is quite impressive. There's hundreds and hundreds of houses that are being upgraded like that. And the real question here is, in the Netherlands, there's 1.9 million houses that could potentially be upgraded in that way. Houses from between 1950 and 1980. So the real question is, where are these houses? How can you map the EPC data with data from a location, with bank data, owners, etc. And instead of having people to do this demonstration, you could just identify them in the Netherlands, in all of Europe, and say, this is a package for you. If you're up for it, we could scale this up tremendously. A lot of people who get a lot of money by not having to spend their money on energy bills. It could create a tremendous number of jobs, and we could roll that up to all of Europe. Second example that I really like, you've all seen that, of course, the self-driving cars. This is a Model X. And it will completely change the way we actually think about mobility, because this is only the first step, electric self-driving cars. The next is actually sharing the capital that's in these cars and allowing people to completely reinvent the way they go from A to B. And the real value there is not only the technology, 8 cameras, sensors, all of that, the radar, but it's also the fleet learning ability. We have the maps on our GPS, but every time a self-driving car, Tesla, goes on a ramp, an off-ramp, they measure the speed, they measure the exact curve, and a whole new set of high-definition, high-precision maps is being generated. And up until now, they've actually had more than 3 billion, I estimate, than fleet learning miles, so kilometers. So the cars who teach themselves, be careful, this ramp, maybe it's been taken a bit too fast. I've been driving Tesla for 7 years, and I have 60,000 kilometers of autopilot, and for me, it's like going from a dumb phone to a smartphone. Whenever I'm in a normal non-autopilot car, it's incredible how fast you get used to this and how retarded non-self-driving cars become. So this will massively change the way we deal with mobility, and if it's in a shared capacity, this could actually substitute for a big part public transport. Okay, so the examples I wanted to show of what we do with Futureproofed, we are a small consultancy based in Leuven in Belgium. We work for cities and for companies, and we've made analysis on how to reduce carbon and save money for many years, building reports, but we thought there must be a better way to do this. And so we started designing dashboards. One of the dashboards we made was for GE Lighting, looking at the efficiency of relighting projects in Portugal for one of their clients. We built dashboards for Leuven and Mechelen cities. Actually, the first 2 cities, I think, in Europe to show on a quasi-real time, a monthly basis, what their emissions are, and engaging their citizens, showing what works, what doesn't work, etc. But after a certain time, we thought, making this again and again from scratch. And so last year we spent a year doing some design sprints, talking with cities, and we developed a SaaS, software as a service app, for those cities that commit to reducing their emissions. In Europe, there are 6,600 cities that have signed the Covenant of Mayors. They say, okay, by 2020, we'll reduce 20% our emissions. But very often, it's 1 or 2 people in a city administration. It's a very lonely position. They've signed this thing, but now they have to transform this commitment into action. How will we manage that? How will we communicate with our citizens, etc.? And so we built this after a lot of trial and error. It's an online tool that helps cities develop, monitor and manage and visualize and engage with their citizens. And it's a big, you would say, yeah, it's not such a revolutionary thing, but it's a big change for city administration, because now they can choose their measures. They can see how much they save and estimated in euros and in carbon. They can prioritize. They can see what works, what doesn't work, have discounted cash flow information, etc., and have a view that they're not used to having about their climate plan, and actually being able to communicate with the mayors, etc., about investment waves and return on investment that they will have if the whole plan is executed. So instead of having this as a responsibility hat, and we have to do it because we're in Covenant of Mayors, now it becomes a tool to show that if you do this well, the citizens, the public sector, etc., in a city can actually save a lot of money and engage their citizens while they're at it. And so this is the public page. The previous pages were internal, like management tools. This shows to the citizen what's happening, where they can participate, maybe in a group purchasing, where there are retrofit programs, etc. And they can click on that and learn and participate. Another element that we have there is actually the network of cities that we build can learn from each other. So Antwerp and Ghent, two Belgian cities. Let's say Antwerp is one of the first clients. Let's say they have finished one of those measures successfully. They can publish that internally to the network, and another city can say, this is interesting, and convert this to their own measure. It goes into their plan, adapted to the number of citizens, etc. Almost over time. And then we scale this up a bit. This is beta, in which we can show different cities in a region to look at how they're performing with respect to one another. And ultimately, we want to go to a sort of city benchmarking. This is not developed yet, in which you'd have, you would visualize the decarbonization process and introduce a bit of friendly competition between cities. Okay, in closing, many organizations, cities around the world see this challenge, have committed to doing something, but the reality for the moment is kind of a quantum reality. There are two realities happening at the same time. On the one hand, bad news. If we look at the Paris goals, this is the real evolution of our carbon emissions. You see, month by month, we're nearing the targets that we set ourselves quite rapidly. 83 years before time, because those are targets for the end of the century. On the other hand, there's another reality in which we see that the speed with which the move to a renewable future is happening exponentially. There's actually learning rates for every doubling of the installed base of photovoltaic energy. For instance, you see 24% reduction in unit cost. Same thing goes for wind. And here in Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, Kriegers Flak is the lowest price for offshore wind for the world's first supergrid. Same thing, learning rate of 19%. Every time the quantity of gigawatts doubles, there's a 19% reduction. So it's predictable, it's going in an exponential way. So it's a very exciting trend that we see here. And if you look at it from a big picture view, it's completely feasible. If we tie all those renewable energy sources together, and for instance, just solar, this would be the surface area we need for solar to completely move off of fossil fuels worldwide. Or if you put it in time, 1 hour of sunlight would power the complete demands of energy for the whole world for a year. So it's there, it's happening, and it's more and more becoming not just a project of companies and big multinationals, but also of citizens. Here in Germany, in Gheldere, 50% almost of the renewable energy target is in hand of citizens. And they go and they organize themselves in co-ops. Okay, last slide. This is what I really believe, that we are the people who could be shaping this. We can actually make this choice. We could be shaping the next industrial revolution and accelerate the transition to a fossil-free, closed-loop economy. I believe that the coming decades are the most important since the beginning of mankind. It's kind of a big statement to make, but I really believe that. But I also believe that we have the choice between two possible futures. Either we let it happen, there's no place for spectators, but either we let it happen and we are the assholes who let this happen, or we are the hero generation who seizes this crisis and transforms it into an opportunity. And I believe that data professionals in every possible sector can help drive this faster, scale it up more rapidly, and most of all, turn it into an opportunity. I invite you all to be part of that movement and think about it, how you can do that professionally and personally. Thanks a lot.